Welcome back. The goal of this chapter is to remove the port 8080 from our public-facing URLs. Easy to do, you would think, and it kind of is, but I'm going to add an extra layer to the architecture. This is going to be the Apache HTTP server. There's good reasons for doing this, and all will be explained. We will be making Apache and Tomcat work together using this interestingly named feature of ReverseProxies. As I'm sure you know, the :8080 is where we're using a non-standard port for testing and development purposes. But of course, for a professional customer-facing website, we certainly do not want a port number appearing in there, so we really need to be able to serve this application on port 80. And there are two ways of doing this. The obvious way is to simply configure Tomcat to run on port 80 instead of port 8080. Now, you might think that's going to be a fairly simple configuration job, but unfortunately it isn't. If we go into the /usr/share/tomcat8/conf directory, on the face of it, if I do a sudo nano and the file we're looking for is server.xml, you'll need to scroll down a little bit to the tags called connector, and this is where we're binding to the port 8080. There are actually two references to port 8080. Now, unfortunately, it is not a simple case of changing these to 80 and restarting Tomcat, and the reason is only the root account is able to bind to any of the ports, I think, below 1024. So it's effectively a security restriction on this flavour of Linux, and it's there for a good reason. Now, we could absolutely do that configuration. I just did a random Google off camera, very useful article at the URL you can see here, talking about running Tomcat on port 80, and they're saying exactly the same thing there, that we need it to listen to port 80, but only the super user can do that. And they're giving a solution here which involves editing the IP tables file. And it's effectively setting up a forwarding from port 80 to port 8080. Now, you could do that, but I have to admit I have no experience of doing this, and I wouldn't be 100% confident that this is a safe option to follow. The reason I'm unsure about doing this is that what many projects do in practice is they will have two web servers running on their server. This type of setup is called running a reverse proxy. The idea behind a reverse proxy is that when our browser connects to our server, we're not going to have the browser connecting to Tomcat anymore. Instead, we're going to set up a regular web server. Now, I don't know how you are with regular web servers. Perhaps the most commonly used in the industry, at the time of recording anyway, and it's certainly been the case for many years now, would be the standard Apache HTTP server. Now, this is slightly confusing because, of course, Tomcat is part of the Apache project, and it is officially called Apache Tomcat. But the server I'm talking about here is a completely separate server, which is called just Apache, really. So you'll often hear it referred to be specific as the Apache HTTP server. This is designed out of the box, at least, to work with just standard web pages. Apache can't run any Java. Now, I'm only really covering Apache on this course because that's the one that we've used most at Virtual Pair Programmers, but there are many other options out there. I'm just using this as one working example, but it is commonly used. And you'll find that Apache is configured out of the box to work on port 8080, and we won't have to do any complex work to make that happen. But what we then do is do a further configuration to say to Apache, for all requests, we would like you to forward the request to our Tomcat instance, which of course is running on port 8080. The user won't see any of this. This forwarding is going on behind the scenes. And because we're going to be running Apache and Tomcat on the same instance, there won't be any networking problems. Now, I know this looks like a far more complicated option than just running Tomcat on its own, but this configuration does have a lot of advantages. I've got just 3 advantages on this caption, but there are actually many more. And the first advantage would be that Apache, the standalone Apache, has been developed for a lot longer than Tomcat, and it has a lot more features. I just have a few random examples here, such as URL rewriting, which I won't talk about in detail, but it is a powerful feature that a lot of web administrators would want to have. Apache has very capable caching features, so you can say, for instance, that unless an image or a CSS file has changed, tell the browser that there's no need for it to re-download that file. And I think the big one for me is that it's very easy on Apache to configure multiple domains. So that means different domain names going to the same web server. Much harder to do that kind of thing on Tomcat. We don't need to worry too much about what those features are for this course, because this isn't really a web administration course, but suffice to say, there's a lot of stuff you can do in Apache. But another useful feature is by using this architecture, we can put Tomcat behind a firewall. We'll basically remove public access to port 8080. And that means just that Tomcat, which, if you think about it, is a very vulnerable part of our application because it's running very complex Java code, the fact that that port is now no longer accessible to the public makes our system just that little bit more secure. So, for example, it would be harder for a malicious hacker to mount a denial of service attack against our Tomcat server. The third advantage, and this is an advantage that I will demonstrate in this chapter, is that it turns out to be very easy to set up static subsites. I'll explain that in a moment with a full working example, but it basically means that we could just forward some of the requests to the Tomcat, but we could make some of the requests be handled by Apache, and that gives us a lot of flexibility in our deployment. So that's the architecture that I'm planning to set up for the rest of the course. I hope you get a feeling for this as being a useful way of doing things. Let's see how we would do this in practice. Well, I guess the starting point is we do need to install the Apache server. On this particular Amazon machine instance, it isn't installed by default. So we can do a similar kind of thing to previously. We can do a sudo yum list available, and we'll do a grep for the package. Well, you'd need to know what the package is called. It's not called Apache, it's called HTTPD, which just means the HTTP daemon server. You can see there's a few options. There are actually 2 different versions of HTTPD available. There's 2.2 and 2.4. I think the reason they've got 2 separate packages for this is just that 2.2 is still in very common use on servers around the world, and I think there's quite a lot of inertia preventing people from moving away from 2.2, so it's still fully supported. Of course, by the time you watch this video, you might be getting different options. I think for this course we could actually go with either, and I've tossed a coin really. I think I'm going to go for the standard HTTPD, which will give us version 2.2. So sudo yum install HTTPD should be all we need. So we'll confirm that. And that ran through quite quickly. And now if we do a sudo chk config -- list, we should now see HTTPD, and it is right there, but currently set to off at all run levels. So just as with Tomcat, we may as well do this now. We can do chk config -- levels, and again, we'll go for 2, 3, and 5, just as we did with Tomcat 8, and that's going to be HTTPD on. And I'll recall the list to make sure that that's taken effect. Now I think we will need to start it just for the first time here, so that will be sudo service httpd start. Okay, well, if we now go to the browser, I've still got the 8080 address in here, and that should still be responding. That should still be working. Yeah, it's still refreshing. But if I now take off everything apart from the IP address, that's great. We're now seeing a test page for the Apache server. So that's up and running. It's now just a case of configuring it. Well, configuring the Apache HTTP server is way beyond the scope of this course, and you could certainly have a 30-hour video on how to work with Apache server. But I hope to at least give you the flavor of the server. You will find the configuration file in the /etc directory /httpd/conf. And if I can type ls correctly, you can see there the key file is httpd.conf. Now, this configuration file is very brittle, it's very difficult to work with, very easy to make mistakes. So every time you edit this file, you want to take a safe copy of it. So I'll do a sudo cp for copy, http.conf, and we'll call the copy, let's say, httpd.safe. Now we can edit this file. So sudo nano httpd.conf. And well, it really is frightening and bewildering, the size of this configuration file, but I'm going to suggest we just go all the way down to the bottom, and you should find a pre-configured block here which is actually commented out called the virtual host block. Now, a virtual host is a feature in Apache where you can set up multiple configurations for different domain names all running on the same server. A very powerful feature in itself. But I'm just going to comment out these lines, and we're just going to set up one of these hosts. So all traffic coming to this server is going to be configured by this block. The server admin is meant to be the email address of the administrator of the server, but the document root is specifying where are the HTML files going to be served from for this particular server configuration. That's where you would place any static HTML files that you want Apache to serve up. But remember, we're not serving any static files. We want Tomcat to do all of the work. So we won't bother making any changes to document root for now. We don't need the server name line. This is where in a production environment you would put the full domain name that this virtual host is serving. And then we have the location of where the logs are written to. I'm going to configure this reverse proxy. Now, if you're following along with me, you need to be very careful with your syntax here. The slightest error and things will go wrong. The command in here is proxy pass, which is all one word with a capital P for pass. And what I'm saying is that all requests beginning with /, and in other words that means every single URL entered on this domain, I would like Apache to pass it across to my Tomcat server instead. So after that /, I specify the IP address of the Tomcat server. Well, that's really easy because remember, I am on the server here. So it's going to be http://. I could put in here the 52.17, but there's no need to do that here because remember, Tomcat's running on the same server that Apache's running on. Therefore, I can use the local host address 127.0.1/8080, and that's the crucial bit. Make sure you finish with a /. And that one line of configuration is now going to hand all of the traffic coming into Apache across to Tomcat. So if we do a Control-O to write the file, hit Enter and Control-X, we will need to do a sudo service httpd restart and it's just warning us that that document root doesn't exist. We'll fix that in a few moments, but it started up okay. And the big difference now is if I refresh that bare IP address, this is really good. You can see now, even though we don't have 8080, we are hitting Apache Tomcat. And this is just simply because once again, we haven't defined a welcome page at the root address. But I bet if I do /view allbooks.do, hold your breath here, fantastic. That is now being forwarded across automatically to Tomcat. And Tomcat is now kind of hidden behind this very useful front end of standard regular Apache. So to close this discussion of the Apache architecture, I'd like to demonstrate one of the big features that you get by working in this way. I'll give you a scenario. Imagine that we wanted to add a blog to this website. Now at present, because we're only using Tomcat, we would have to go and set up some kind of a Java-based blog solution and make it part of our web application's WAR file. That would be if we're only using Tomcat. But of course, these days, anybody wanting to set up a blog would typically use something like WordPress or similar, which is not Java-based, and it would be really difficult to incorporate that into our WAR file. Well, now that we've set up this reverse proxy, that's going to be really simple to do. We have our Apache HTTP server. We could install our WordPress solution onto the HTTP server. That's pretty easy to do, beyond the scope of this course, but we'll simulate that just by adding a simple HTML file onto the server. And then we'll configure the HTTP server to say that any URLs beginning with a particular pattern, for example /blog, are going to be directed to the static files on the WordPress solution, and every other URL can be diverted to Tomcat. So in this way, we're going to get the best of both worlds. We get the power and flexibility of WordPress on Apache, combined with our Java web application on port 8080. And it's not too difficult to do. First of all, of course, we would have to install WordPress, which we're certainly not going to do on this course. But the default document routes, if you change directories to cd/var/www/html, you'll find a folder in there which is the default document route for Apache. Actually, in real life, we'd probably go and create a folder specifically for this website, which we would create. We would probably create a new user to do that, and that user would be responsible for this website, and we would set the file permissions accordingly. But just for speed on this course, I'm only demonstrating here. We'll do this in var html. And I'm going to create in there using mkdir a folder called blog. Well, I don't have permissions to do that, so I'll recall it and use sudo. And then inside blog, to simulate our WordPress system, I'm going to create a file called, let's go for blog.html. And of course, in there we would have some kind of beautiful blog. So Control O again, hit enter, and Control X. Okay, now we need to do some configuration changes. So I've lost the directory now. Back into etc httpd and conf, and again we'll edit httpd.conf. And what I'm going to do first of all is change the document routes. We know now that our document route is going to be /var/www/html, and I'll leave a / on the end of that document route. But what we want to say is we want to say any URLs beginning with /blog must not be passed across to the proxy. And we do that by entering a new line, and this must crucially come before the one that we had before. And that's because these proxy rules are evaluated in order. I hope you'll see the point of that in a minute. So we need another proxy pass, but this time we're going to say /blog / is not going to go to the proxy. So we add in, it's a bit weird this, an exclamation mark. Don't send that to Tomcat. Instead, direct it to the document root. And you can probably see the reason now why this must come first. They're evaluated in order, and once it finds a match, it stops. So if you had them the other way around, the /blogs would be matched by this, and Tomcat would try to serve /blog. Let's write out those changes. And we will want to service httpd restart. We should see now no errors. And now back to the browser. I think the first thing to do is to test that, view all books is working, and I should be able to follow these links. That's all working well. If I just do a / there, that's still trying to go across to Tomcat, which is good. But now if I go to blog /blog.html, that's ignoring Tomcat, and it's being served by Apache. So I hope you can see the kind of power and flexibility that we have here. Without Apache in place here, we would have had to somehow make that blog be part of our WAR file, and that might have made our deployments very much more complicated. There are a lot more things you can do with Apache. I just wanted to give you a flavour right here. Just one more chapter to go. In that final chapter, we will have a brief look at the elastic nature of Amazon. We will also clean up the resources we've used to avoid incurring any charges. I'll see you for that.